Good morning, Glue Troopers, and welcome back to the TARDIS. And this morning I'm going to continue with our air race series, and today I'm going to talk about the Greve Trophy race. I had mentioned it before. We talked mostly about the Snyder Cup for seaplanes, the Bendix cross-country flight, and of course the Thompson pylon races. But the Greve race, which only ran from 1934 to 1939, was for airplanes with 550 cubic inch displaced engines or less. And the reason that this race was so important was because Louis Greve, who sponsored the trophy race, had realized that people were making airplanes go faster essentially through brute force. Planes like the GBs, the Waddell Williams, and the like, you're just getting bigger planes with bigger engines. And there was certainly technology to be had in that, but he also realized no one was really working on increasing the technology or the efficiency of the engine. So he thought by limiting it to 550 cubic inches that there would be a push towards better airframe design, improvements to the engines, and he was right. From 34 to 39, people were pushing the edge of streamlining and retractable gear versus fixed gear. All kinds of innovations were being made, and they were also learning ways to tweak out and improve their engines. And probably one of the most impressive races was 1935, when Harold Newman pretty much took everything, including the Greve Trophy. And I'll probably do a profile on Harold Newman at some point. And he did it in a Howard. And I'm also going to do a profile on Benny Howard, who made the DGA aircraft, darn good airplanes. And yes, that's what they claimed DGA stood for. But the Howards were a series of both streamlined racers and the famous Mr. Mulligan. But we'll get to that in a later video. I just wanted to talk about the Greve race today because it took a different approach to the race. Now, each of these old great races had sort of a particular objective in mind. The Schneider Cup for the seaplanes was the big international race where, you know, countries could it was more to push national pride, and at the time when those races were taking place, there weren't many airports. Doing over the water seaplanes made sense for a lot of reasons. But when it came to the Bendix races, aside from, of course, you know, just impressing people with a big air race across the country, it was pushing the state-of-the-art in flying aircraft cross-country. Just like the Thompson was, you know, it was a pylon race, but it made airplanes be both maneuverable and fast. And it was really a good, I think the Thompson was a good, you know, sort of general purpose race because you needed speed and you needed maneuverability. Whereas in something like the Bendix, you pretty much just needed speed. Although your ability to get to altitude turned out to be important for several of the racers. But the Greve probably had the single most specific function, and that function being to make sure that we were pushing the technology forward without trying to just make it better through or more capable through brute force and brute size. Let's actually push the technology. And the result were some pretty interesting airplanes. Of Howard's 4 aircraft, 3 of them were qualified to race in the Greve, Pete, Ike, and Mike. And there were a lot of others, and of course, you see pilots like Tony LeVere and others that would be racing these very small, really very small airplanes. And the performance they were getting out of them was impressive. Of course, by 1939, with war clouds looming and everything, the Greve race had pretty much kind of done its job, and people were on to bigger things. In fact, I would say 1939 was probably the end of the golden era of racing in general. Now, we still have airplanes with small displacements and horsepower limitations and things that race in other races today. And aircraft like Nemesis were very impressive. I believe it was restricted to 100 horsepower, and it was about as efficient as a small plane could get. I would also point out that some of the aircraft that competed in the Greve race were still competitive against the larger, better financed aircraft. This is how we advanced aviation, and in those days, air racing had a lot to do with it. So here's the Louis Greve and the Greve Trophy, a smaller race that really should be remembered for its contributions to air racing and aviation. I'm Max. Max's Models. You guys have a great Easter weekend and model on.